This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. So, I guess I'm going to have to talk about Candace Owens after what should have been yesterday's astoundingly embarrassing appearance before the House Judiciary Committee, which held a hearing examining FBI statistics which show a marked increase in hate crimes in the United States. But knowing Candace, I don't know Candace, by the way, she's likely not embarrassed. She's probably over the moon that we're even talking about her, even if it's to discuss her wanton dipshittery and lack of any semblance of understanding of American political history. I say that because she described the Southern strategy undertaken by the Republican Party to gain votes in the South as a myth. Now, before I get into the whole Southern strategy thing, the question must be asked. Why in the world was, of all people, non-expert, non-scholar, non-law enforcement official Candace Owens invited to testify before the same committee that will be hearing from the Attorney General of these United States in just a few days? Well, the answer is that the committee is not fully staffed by smart people. There are also historically daft people on the committee. Even by Republican standards, they're daft. Conspiracy theory dum-dums like Jim Jordan, Louis Gohmert, and Matt Gaetz. I mean, why would anyone extend an invitation to discuss the rise of white nationalism in the United States to a person who not only doesn't believe our own FBI crime statistics and doesn't believe white nationalism is a problem to speak of, but also doesn't generally mind nationalism so much that she holds bizarre and frankly stupid ideas about famous nationalists from our history. Nationalists like Adolf Hitler. Back in February, you may remember that her and her pal, the human willow branch, Charlie Kirk, were in Britain. And she explained in an answer to a question why she doesn't really have a problem with nationalism and, by extension, doesn't have a problem with Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way. That's not, to me, that's not nationalism. In thinking about how it could go bad down the line, I don't really have an issue with nationalism. I really don't. I think that it's okay. It's important to retain your country's identity and to make sure that what's happening here, which I think is incredibly worrisome in terms of the decrease in the birth rate that we're seeing in the UK, is what you kind of want to avoid. So I don't have I have no problems with nationalism. It's globalism that I try to avoid.
Yeah, man, I mean, if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great again and have things run well, okay, fine. I mean, it's none of our business if he's systematically conducting large-scale genocide of the Jewish people, as long as he stays in Germany and as long as he's making Germany great again. No biggie, right? Ugh. So anyway, knowing that this is the kind of garbage she believes, of course, the Republican members of the committee extended her a warm welcome to come speak. Now, her entire testimony was riddled with stupidity, but I'm only going to discuss her claim that the Southern strategy is a myth.
Over and over again about black conservatives when they have the audacity to think for themselves and become educated about our history and the myth of things like the Southern switch and the Southern strategy, which never happened.
You mentioned, I think.
So the Southern strategy is a myth. So says Candace Owens. Well, for those of you who don't know and have always wondered how it is that the Republican Party used to be the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party who undertook the abolition of slavery and went to war against the traitorous Confederacy, and now is the party which cries and whines about Black Lives Matters and fights to keep monuments to white supremacy up in parks all across the country. Well, that, my friends, is because of the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy was an organized, insipid political strategy of the Republican Party meant to strategically bolster party support among white voters in the South by subtly, and not so subtly, appealing to racism against blacks in America. As the civil rights movement started picking up steam and Jim Crow laws began being dismantled, there was an aggressive uptick of insecurity within the white racist voters all across the southern states. And this insecurity manifested in extreme racial tensions, resentments, and often culminated in violence at the hands of white southern racists. Well, Republicans like Barry Goldwater and Richard Nixon are waiting in the wings, developing what became known as the Southern Strategy, which successfully contributed to the political realignment of vast swaths of the historically conservative white vote in the South, who, up to that point, had traditionally supported the Democratic Party. You see, Democrats used to be the party of the slave-owning asshole Andrew Jackson, the party of slavery and of the KKK, the party of Jim Crow, and in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education was the first glimmer of a threat against total white supremacy in the South. This was the Supreme Court case which reversed separate but equal, which was established by Plessy versus Ferguson and ruled that state laws establishing racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional even if the segregated schools were considered otherwise equal in quality. It took several years, but the Republicans used that insecurity among Southern white racists to make the gradual switch in Southern party dominance. And they did this by using coded language and abstractions of political benefits. For instance, in 1964, Barry Goldwater, campaigning on issues like states' rights, is that familiar? States' rights, dominated in the South like no other Republican had done before. Look at these electoral maps starting in 1900. This is every presidential election map from the turn of the century after the Civil War going forward. Democrats dominate in southern states. To call this a stronghold is an understatement. Keep your eye on the blue, which are Democrat wins, and pay particular attention to the southern states. It's not until 1964, like I just mentioned, that Republican Barry Goldwater made a mark in the South. And then, in 1968, Nixon would have taken the southern states in a sweep if it hadn't been for rabid, hateful segregationist George Wallace, who beat Nixon in the racist Olympics that year by winning Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And then, in one last fluke because a Southern governor was running for president, the map flashed blue again for the very last time. As Steve Kornacki describes it, quote, Democrats thought they had solved their Southern problem in 1976 when a peanut farmer turned Georgia governor named Jimmy Carter swept through the old Confederacy, winning every state except Virginia en route to a narrow electoral college victory over President Gerald Ford. For the first time in 12 years, the Democrats had won a national election, and Dixie was the reason why. This resurgence, though, was little more than a mirage, a brief interruption in the South's steady march away from the Democratic Party, unquote. Because by 1980, Ronald Reagan was known as the Republican using not-so-veiled coded language while railing against welfare queens on food stamps, which, to racists in the South, was clearly meant to invoke hateful stereotypes of black single mothers taking advantage of the generosity of the United States taxpayer. And also by 1980, the Southern strategy had worked, and the switch was complete. The South had transformed into a Republican stronghold. But listen, I don't expect you to take my word for it. Listen to the late Lee Atwater, a storied Republican political strategist with deep ties to such shady modern-day Republicans as Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and yes, even Donald Trump. Here is Lee Atwater in what he thought was an off-the-record interview, and in a minute, you'll realize why he thought it was off the record, from 1981, when he was working in the Reagan administration, essentially explaining how the Republican Party and its candidates were able to make inroads with white, racist Southern voters.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
It is undeniable that Lee Atwater is laying out the case for the very things I just described, saying that by the late 60s, Republican politicians couldn't openly use the N-word, but could certainly run against Democrats on issues near and dear to the hearts of racists all over the South. Issues like the Voting Rights Act, forced busing, states' rights, welfare cuts, and on and on and on. And that is exactly what they did. And it worked. Because including the election Ronald Reagan won in 1980, there have been 10 presidential elections. And every single one has included a complete reversal in political party power compared to only 20 years before that. The South is now reliably Republican. This block of states doesn't change. From Ronald Reagan through to our openly white nationalist dummy in the White House that we have today, it is undeniable. So you don't have to believe me, but between Candace Owens, who says she thinks it's a myth, and Lee Atwater, who actually utilized it, and who you just heard talking about it being a real thing, who are you gonna believe?